21 people checked into a hotel in South Delhi, expecting an ordinary day. Some were traveling, some were visiting nearby hospitals. Some planned to leave the city within hours. None of them knew they were walking into one of Delhi's deadliest hotel fire disasters in recent years. What began as a small fire inside an ordinary building would soon fill hallways with smoke, trap guests inside their rooms, and trigger a desperate race against time. As firefighters battled to reach those trapped within the building, families outside waited for phone calls that would never come. The tragedy would leave 21 people dead, many others injured, and raise serious questions about how a routine morning turned into a catastrophe. But perhaps the most troubling question was this: how did a normal hotel become a deadly trap? This is the story of the Delhi hotel fire disaster. June 2026. In the heart of India's capital city, life was unfolding exactly as it did every other morning. The streets of South Delhi were already crowded with commuters heading to work, students making their way to college, and shopkeepers preparing to open their businesses. Traffic moved slowly through the busy roads of Malviya Nagar, while the city continued its familiar rhythm of noise, movement, and activity. Among the many buildings standing in the Hazrani area was a hotel that, at first glance, appeared completely ordinary. It was the kind of place people passed every day without giving it a second thought. Guests checked in and out regularly. Travelers stayed for a night before continuing their journeys. Families booked rooms while visiting Delhi. Patients and their relatives often chose accommodations in the area because several major hospitals were located nearby. For most people, it was simply a temporary place to stay, nothing more. On that particular morning, dozens of people were inside the building. Some were still asleep after arriving late the previous night. Others had already started their day. A few were preparing for medical appointments. Some were speaking with family members back home. Others were planning the next stage of their journey. They came from different cities, different states, different countries. Most of them had never met each other. Yet within a few hours, their lives would become connected by a single terrifying event. None of them knew they were only hours away from the most terrifying experience of their lives. At that moment, there was no sign of danger, no warning, no alarm, no indication that the building around them would soon become the center of one of Delhi's deadliest fire disasters in recent years. Like many tragedies, it began quietly. Somewhere inside the building, a fire broke out. The exact cause remains under investigation. At first, the danger may not have appeared significant. A small flame, a hidden source of heat, a problem that seemed manageable in its earliest moments. But fires inside enclosed buildings can become deadly with astonishing speed. Heat rises, smoke spreads, visibility disappears, and once escape routes begin filling with smoke, every minute becomes critical. Inside the hotel, the first signs of trouble slowly began to appear. The smell of smoke drifted through parts of the building. Some guests noticed it immediately. Others dismissed it as something minor. Several people opened their doors and looked into the corridors. Perhaps something was burning nearby. Perhaps there was a small electrical problem. But the situation was already becoming far more serious than anyone realized. The air became harder to breathe. Visibility slowly began to disappear. And suddenly, what had started as an ordinary morning no longer felt ordinary at all. The realization spread quickly through the building. Something was terribly wrong. And for the people trapped inside, time was beginning to run out. As the smoke thickened, confusion quickly turned into panic. Guests began leaving their rooms in search of exits. Some moved toward stairways. Others followed whatever direction seemed safest. Many simply followed the movement of the crowd, hoping someone else knew a way out. But conditions inside the building continued deteriorating. Smoke moved through corridors and enclosed spaces. The deeper it spread, the harder it became for people to navigate. What had once been familiar hallways now felt like a maze.
Visibility dropped dramatically. The air grew heavier. Breathing became increasingly difficult. For many occupants, the greatest danger was no longer the fire itself, it was the smoke. Outside the building, people began noticing dark clouds rising into the sky. Residents stopped and looked upward. Something was clearly wrong. Within minutes, emergency calls began reaching authorities. The situation was escalating rapidly. As crowds gathered below, horrifying scenes began unfolding above them. People appeared at windows. Some waved desperately for help. Others tried to escape the smoke filling their rooms. Witnesses later described scenes of confusion and desperation as trapped occupants searched for fresh air. From the streets below, residents watched helplessly while emergency crews rushed toward the scene. What had begun as an ordinary morning was now unfolding into a full-scale disaster in front of hundreds of people. For those trapped on the upper floors, the choices became unimaginable. Firefighters knew every minute mattered. In major building fires, conditions can change rapidly. Heat intensifies. Smoke spreads unpredictably. Escape routes become blocked. And the window for rescue becomes smaller with every passing moment. When rescue teams arrived, they faced a chaotic and dangerous situation. Smoke poured from the structure. People remained trapped inside, and rescuers now faced a race against time. Their objective was simple: get people out as quickly as possible. But carrying out that mission would prove far more difficult than anyone had hoped. Because inside the building, visibility had been reduced dramatically. The heat continued rising, and somewhere within the smoke-filled structure, frightened guests were still searching for a way to survive. What rescuers would encounter over the next several hours would leave a lasting mark on everyone involved. And by the time the fire was finally brought under control, the true scale of the disaster would begin to emerge. As firefighters pushed deeper into the building, they entered conditions that few people can truly imagine. Every room had to be searched. Every floor had to be checked. And somewhere inside the building, frightened guests were still waiting to be found. Outside, the crowds continued growing. Inside the hotel, rescue teams worked relentlessly. Some survivors were guided through smoke-filled corridors. Others were carried to safety. Many required immediate medical attention after inhaling large amounts of smoke. Ambulances lined the streets nearby. The narrow roads surrounding the building quickly filled with emergency vehicles. Sirens echoed through the neighborhood as rescue teams continued searching for anyone who might still be alive inside the smoke-filled structure. Doctors and emergency personnel prepared for a growing number of casualties. For those who managed to escape, the experience would remain unforgettable. Only a short time earlier, they had been preparing for an ordinary day. Now they stood outside watching a building burn while wondering whether friends, relatives, and fellow guests were still trapped inside. The operation continued for hours, and as rescuers searched room after room, a devastating reality slowly began to emerge. Not everyone had made it out. Some people had been overcome by smoke before they could escape. Others had become trapped as conditions deteriorated. The longer the search continued, the clearer it became that this was no longer just a rescue operation. It was becoming a recovery operation. As the flames were finally brought under control, officials began assessing the full scale of the disaster. The news that followed shocked the city. 21 people had lost their lives. Many others were injured. Hospitals across the area received survivors suffering from burns, smoke inhalation, and other injuries. For families waiting outside, the situation became a nightmare. Throughout the day, relatives rushed to hospitals searching for information. Some traveled across the city
hoping to find missing family members.
As rescue operations came to an end, attention began shifting toward a different task: understanding what had happened. Investigators examined the building, reviewed safety measures, and worked to reconstruct the events that transformed an ordinary morning into a disaster. The exact cause remained under investigation, but the questions were already clear. How had the fire spread so quickly? Why had escape become so difficult? And could more have been done to prevent the tragedy? Those answers may take time, but one thing was certain. What began as a normal morning in South Delhi ended with a city searching for answers. And as investigators continue their work, one hope remains: that the lessons learned from this disaster help prevent another tragedy from happening in the future.